Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. More strikes on Beirut as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects calls for a ceasefire and tells Israel's military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. US State Secretary Antony Blinken saying the world agrees on the need for a ceasefire ahead of meeting Israeli officials in New York. And Ukraine's President Zelensky thanks the White House for a further $8 billion in aid, rounding off his trip stateside. The health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza has released new data on the number of deaths since the war began when Hamas militants attacked Israel on October 7th. As of today, at least 41,534 people have been killed in Gaza in the war between Israel and Palestinian militants. The toll includes 39 deaths in the previous 24 hours. Well, for more on the state of conflict between Israel and its neighbours, not only in Gaza but across the border in Lebanon as well, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Sarah Coates. And Sarah, let's begin with this. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel Katz rejecting hopes for a 21-day ceasefire. Tell us more.
Certainly, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it wasn't very long ago that he did land in New York ahead of his address at the UN General Assembly tomorrow. He came out to say, our policy is clear. We will continue attacking Hezbollah with all our might. And we also heard from the Foreign Minister Israel Katz a little earlier in the day. He said, there will be no ceasefire in the north. We will continue to fight against the terrorist organisation Hezbollah with all our might until victory and until the safe return of the residents of the north to their homes. So there certainly is a lot of pushback here in Israel over this ceasefire plan with Hezbollah, and we're hearing pretty strong wording also coming out from a couple of people that do keep Benjamin Netanyahu in power. That is the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and also the National Security Minister Issam Ben-Gvir. And they've been real fierce opponents of any kind of ceasefire in this region. They've been saying to Benjamin Netanyahu that they'll pull out of the government if he makes an irresponsible deal with Hamas in Gaza. But now they're basically saying the same thing again when it comes to Hezbollah. And that is, according to Ben-Gvir, he says we'll leave the government, we'll collapse this coalition. And we do need to remember here that Benjamin Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure. He's desperately trying to remain in power, and these are the people who keep them there. So certainly this is not surprising, and we can expect to hear more statements like this from Israeli officials.
Yeah, and just about 24 hours ago, we were hearing about potential intention to send troops across the border there into Lebanon, boots on the ground. What else have we been hearing out of Israel's military today in terms of intentions and what's going on in Lebanon?
Well, it is important to mention this targeted strike that happened in southern Beirut just a couple of hours ago. The military claims that it has killed yet another Hezbollah commander, this one of a drone unit. Still no confirmation from Hezbollah, but this is significant given that it is in Beirut, the fourth time this week that the Israeli military has struck in that area. And we are also hearing some pretty worrying rhetoric coming from the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi. He says the military must continue to strike the terror group. He says we need to keep attacking. We have been waiting for years for this opportunity. He also went on to say we are constantly working to eliminate more Hezbollah commanders. Now, we also do need to point out that the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, he's approved additional plans, operational plans for the Israeli military. And there is a lot of concern, really, within the global community and right around this region over the prospect of a ground operation in over that border there into Lebanon, and this is certainly something that has not been ruled out by the Israeli government. So this, of course, is very worrying. Israel does have the advantage when it comes to this aerial campaign, but certainly it would be a very different situation when it comes to a ground campaign. And we have to remember here that Hezbollah is estimated to have around 150 rockets. Many of them can reach anywhere in Israel. And these Hezbollah fighters, they are battle-hardened after fighting in the Syrian civil war. So this is of great concern, of course, to the international community. And if indeed there were to be a ground operation, it would likely have catastrophic results and would likely have a very high death toll on both sides of this border.
And look, despite the aerial bombardment, the advantage that Israel has with that and the targeted strikes on Hezbollah commanders, Hezbollah is still firing rockets into northern Israel today.
It certainly is, and the last red alerts, air raid sirens went off in the north 20 or so minutes ago, and this has really been continuing throughout the day. According to the Israeli military, more than 150 rockets have been fired over into Israeli territory throughout the course of the day. Many of these were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defence system. Others haven't been intercepted. Some have hit houses, others open areas. And these residents who have remained in these largely evacuated communities of Israel's north, many of them have spent the day inside bomb shelters. And this has really been the reality for them for these past few weeks. And of course, since October 8, and this is when Hezbollah began firing rockets into Israel, saying that it's doing so in solidarity with the people in Gaza, saying that it will not stop until there is a ceasefire in Gaza.
Just finally, Sarah, in terms of the idea that Israel could send troops over the border into southern Lebanon, how would that go down with the Israeli public, do you think?
Very surprising, actually. There has been a poll that's just been carried out exactly on this, and 73% of responders came out to say that they believe a war in Lebanon is actually necessary. And this number was even higher when you're talking to these people in these largely evacuated northern communities. I've actually spent a fair bit of time up there talking to these people over the last few months, and really the sentiment there with them is all the same. They've been very, very angry at the Israeli government for not changing the status quo, for not changing the security situation on the ground. They've told me that they feel like they've been left alone. They've been given no support from the government. They desperately want to go back home. We're talking here more than 60,000 internally displaced people, and they're really fed up. So it is a lot of these people in the north that are really gunning for this status quo to be changed, the Israeli military to go in there and push these Hezbollah fighters further north, back up behind the Litani River. So it is gaining a lot of support. And in saying this, coming back to Benjamin Netanyahu again, this is once again seeing his popularity surge. And it really did go down in the wake of October 7. But now with this new campaign, it is once again on the rise.
Sarah Coates, live for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Well, to get more on this story, I'm joined from Beirut now by the director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy at the American University of Beirut, Professor Joseph Bahout. Professor, let's talk about Israel seemingly rejecting the ceasefire, this hoped-for 21-day plan put forward by 12 allies earlier. What was your reaction to that?
Frankly, in a way or another, one cannot be very much surprised by that, because Benjamin Netanyahu's course of action over the past 10 months in Gaza has been a little bit similar. You know, every time there was a serious proposal put by the Americans and other Westerners on the table, he has relinquished it after adding several conditions. For this one in particular, I think that his more or less this squares with his calculus. You know, he's been eroding Hezbollah's capabilities for now more than a month. persistently, and some of the blows have really dealt high damages to Hezbollah. I think that the Israeli establishment probably perceives that, as your correspondent was saying, there is now a golden opportunity to do what the Israelis call themselves mowing the lawn in neighboring countries. They know that they cannot finish off Hezbollah completely, but probably that now they are perceiving an opportunity to maybe degrade and erode the party's capability for a long time. So in a way, what this shows is that the real aim of Netanyahu is not only or exactly to bring back the northern North Israel villagers to their villages, because he could do that by accepting the ceasefire agreement and a muscular resolution 1701, but it increasingly appears that the real aim of this war in Lebanon is not exactly that, or is not only that, and that there are other aims which he seems to be fulfilling by now. The question will become how long will Hezbollah accept or remain without a stronger reaction, if they can, because we don't know how much they have been incapacitated by the blows. And at that moment, the role, I mean, the possibility of this going to an all-out war with a ground offensive becomes increasingly possible.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has also threatened to leave the government if Netanyahu agreed to a permanent ceasefire. How does that dynamic affect their government and the ability to get a ceasefire?
Yeah, as we were saying, this is exactly the same scenario that has been played out for the last 10 months in Gaza. Every time Netanyahu is giving signs that he's ready to accept something, a deal that would free the hostages, that would temporarily or durably halt the war in Gaza, his right-winger ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the likes, were jumping to the fray and saying, if you do that, we will quit the government. Now they are doing the same, with the difference that maybe a larger spectrum in Israel, and your correspondent was saying that, be it in the public opinion in Israel or in the cabinet, Gallant and etc., are more or less on the same page. So I think that the mood in Israel today politically is for a prolongation of the operations in Lebanon, probably upscaling them, hitting Hezbollah harder and harder, expecting that the party is losing its means, and that ultimately it will accept, of course, a revised resolution in the south, but on the way towards that, Israel would have gained an eroded Hezbollah, a degraded and weakened Hezbollah. Now, if things don't go this direction, if Hezbollah proves in the coming weeks to be more resistant than that, I think that the Israeli planners will be faced with another critical decision. Will they have to go to a ground offensive to change the equation on the ground, with all the risks and the costs that this entail, meaning getting maybe into a Lebanese quagmire again, as they have been for decades in the 80s and the 90s, or ultimately accept the ceasefire that the Americans are putting on the table? The problem is that I don't see so far Hezbollah budging. So I expect, and we can all expect, an increase, a sort of, let's say, escalated mode of action of Israel in Lebanon, maybe hitting persistently nervous centers in the country, not only Hezbollah, but maybe civilian infrastructure in Beirut. And then we will see how much Hezbollah can still react. And today it showed that its reaction is still possible. Of course, it's not completely intact, but it can also harm Israel in return.
Thank you very much, Director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy of the American University of Beirut, Professor Joseph Bahout. Well, let's talk more about some of the wider implications of this conflict on Lebanon's stability and indeed recovery. I'm joined by Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna in the studio. He's the chapter president of the World Economic Association and former World Bank consultant. Sir, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Look, as a Lebanese economics expert, what's your biggest concern for Lebanon at the moment?
It's strange because Lebanon, as you know, just in 2019 in October, just faced a financial and economic collapse. The whole economy, the financial system, the banking, which was actually concentrated by the political regime, central bank, and the banks as well. So it was a devastating. The currency devaluated more than 98%. Inflation actually, it was hugely. So they faced actually hyperinflation. And so this kind of crisis at this crossroad right now it's exacerbating that fragile economy. As we can see that Lebanon just started bouncing back last year through tourism, through the economy, the vitality of the Lebanese people, the tourism, the potential there. They started at least breathing with that. However, they're just coming up. Their Lebanon's GDP was $50 billion. Over the past 5 years, they lost to $20 billion. That's a huge, fall in that. Now, it's really exacerbating a fragile economy. Now we are expecting after this, and what actually concerns me and worries me the most is that when it's actually the instability and what happened in the summer, and it's dragging, that actually hurt tourism big time over the summer. So summer was actually, we started feeling and seeing that recession. We were expecting this year GDP to grow by 2%. Mm-hmm. However, it was actually turned out to be a negative 1 to 1.5%. Now with that crisis coming up, war on Lebanon being declared openly, and with that magnitude, we are expecting a contraction in the gross domestic product, in the size of the economy, 6 to 10%. And if that prolongs, and the way we are seeing Netanyahu now rejecting the ceasefire orchestrated internationally by the main powers, that means that there is an intention to go further and escalate that. That escalates and takes much longer. You never know, we might reach 20 to 25% contraction in the GDP. That's one aspect in this. But at the same time, Rosanna, this is hurting not only the size of the economy. Of course, the most important, the human lives, the victims, the displaced. We have about 200,000 displaced people right now, and it's growing. The victims, among them children and women. The collateral damages, it's not about the military, what's happening, and this is priceless. Human lives, it's priceless. We cannot put an economic value on that. That said, you have different elements. Lebanon was on the brink of a huge collapse, and it's very fragile because it has a very rich fabric of different sects and denominations and religions, and its critical location should be an exemplary role model of that kind of stability and peace. If that actually becomes available, then the sky's the limit. However, right now, things are going backward big time. Tourism, take for instance tourism. Tourism last year, actually in 2023, it contributed to the economy by $5.4 billion. Right now, occupancy rate at the hotels, they're down to 10% only. The revenues, they actually dropped by 85%. If you look, and there's something important, the farmers and those people, and I'm talking not for one, it's across the country, the agricultural damage that happened. The phosphorus bombs right now hitting the southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, which are the core of the agriculture produce of Lebanon, and this is the main export, bringing foreign currency to the country, that have been devastated. We're estimating this between $2.5 to $4 billion until now, until today. So that actually already, it's a huge bill. Healthcare, the healthcare actually sector, it's already very much stressed. With the Syrian refugees, you have 1.5 million. Right now, you have a different kind of displacement into specific areas coming from the south, from the Bekaa, to the Mount of Lebanon and Beirut, that creating more stressful on the infrastructure, healthcare and infrastructure. It's costing billions. Nonetheless, you have to look at the direct cost of the damage that happened to the infrastructure, to the housing, to the displacement. That is a humanitarian crisis. You have also the cost on the trade. Trade right now is going to be definitely impacted because there is, all the airlines, all the supply chain channels, logistics, they're cut. And this is actually last year, imports were about $17.5 billion. Right now, they're definitely going to be negative. They're going to drop down. And that actually constitutes, because Lebanon, depends on that import for producing other products as well, whether in the raw material or other intermediary products and items, and that actually is going to be definitely affected. So we're talking about different sector, let alone the inflation. Inflation was, like I said, hyperinflation during over the past 5 years. And now we started seeing last year a kind of, the inflation started actually subsiding, started actually to be reduced. And now we are seeing it's going to bounce back, where inflation worldwide actually it started, dropping. Now with this crisis, it's going to go over 400% inflation. And sadly, so the monopolistic power in the country with those oligarchs and everything, few traders, they have the medicine, few of them, they have the steel, necessities. Take an example right now, mattresses, which is a human need right now. They are sold at $10 a mattress to the Ministry of Health. They change their mind the next day to $20 and $30 a mattress. So there is a price hoarding. And that's actually that price gouging that's occurring because absence of rule of law. There is no central government to control. And
one example of many that can be picked out from the economic battering that Lebanon has taken. Look, it's been good to get your expertise this evening, Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna. Thank you.
My pleasure.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Rizkan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, welcome back to W News. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken telling MSNBC earlier on today, quote, "The world is speaking clearly for virtually all of the key countries in Europe and in the region on the need for a ceasefire." He added he would be meeting with Israeli officials in New York later today. Well, in an Al Arabiya News interview with Hadley Gamble, former Lebanese MP Walid Jumblat said this about Netanyahu's approach to US officials at the moment.
How telling was it that the attacks on Hezbollah came just one day after the U.S. representative was in Israel having meetings to calm the situation?
It means that they don't care about the U.S. representative. They just don't care. I mean, you're speaking about Hochstein.
Yes.
He doesn't care. The Israelis, Netanyahu, doesn't care about him. He dismisses any effort, although minimal, of U.S. administration to try to appease a little bit, to cool it down.
Well, let's talk a bit more now, shall we, about Israel's relations with the rest of the world, particularly one of its biggest allies, the United States. I'm joined in the studio, I'm pleased to say, by the President and Chief Correspondent of Feature Story News, Simon Marks, very familiar face to this channel. And look, Simon, you cover the US broadly as well as the rest of the world, but you're looking very much at the US election race at the moment. What is the state of the way Israel's playing into that and what's happening in the Middle East?
I think, Rosanna, it's got an outsized impact now on the American presidential race. I mean, that's been clear for several months because of the extent to which Arab American voters particularly, and many of them in crucial battleground states like Michigan, have taken issue with the Biden administration's handling of the situation in Gaza, the Biden-Harris administration's handling, as they always refer to the current American government, and Kamala Harris inherits that difficulty. Now, she says that there are going to be differences if she becomes president of the United States. She will not be silent, she says, in the face of the appalling level of civilian death that has taken place in Gaza, but we don't know what the specifics are of her policy towards the Middle East and how it may change from Joe Biden's policy, and that remains a problem for her with Arab American voters, traditionally a constituency that the Democrats have counted upon. If they stay home, they don't have to turn out for Donald Trump. They can just stay home. Very unlikely to turn out for Donald Trump, given his threats once again to close the country's borders to Muslim travelers from all over the world. If they stay home in a tightly contested election, in battleground states, that's a big problem for the Democrats.
Let's talk for a moment about funding, because it's often a really kind of hot topic when it comes to people thinking about the US and its foreign policy. American voters, what do they want? How much money do they want to be giving to other countries? Because today, the White House announcing it's giving Ukraine, President Zelensky, another $8 billion in aid. And then within the last few hours, we've also learned from Israel saying it secured $8.7 billion in US packages as well for its war efforts. How's all that going to go down?
Well, this is Joe Biden doubling down. He's got 115 days left in his presidency. We now know when he leaves the White House, and he's trying to get as much of this done as possible because they understand at the White House this is a very tightly contested election, and if Donald Trump comes back in, all of those policies in both Ukraine and the Middle East are susceptible to change. American voters, in large measure, those certainly backing Donald Trump, are attracted by his determination to return to something of an isolationist foreign policy and to avoid distant entanglements about which American voters know very little. Trump always says the Biden administration has been more concerned with Russia's border with Ukraine than it has been with America's border to the south with Mexico and the rest of Latin America. So there's no question that there are some voters out there that are going to be attracted to a message of not getting embroiled, as Trump says, wrapping up these conflicts in both the Middle East and Ukraine, he says, within one day of him returning to the White House, although, of course, he never explains how exactly he's going to do that.
Look, while we've got you, it would be remiss not to do another story out of the US today. I know it's caught your attention, which was a big Democrat hopeful. The mayor of New York City, his home's been raided.
Well, absolutely astonishing developments in New York City. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, who has been a growing problem for Democrats, has now made history. He is going to be the first sitting mayor of the Big Apple to face criminal charges. He's facing bribery and corruption charges. He's accused of taking $100,000 in illegal campaign contributions, many of them resulting in preferential treatment that he allegedly won at the hands of Turkish Airlines. And they raided the Gracie Mansion again today, even as they were bringing these indictments, because the FBI and the Department of Justice clearly thinks there may be more stuff to dig into. So for the Democrats, he is now suddenly a massive problem. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, has the power to remove him from office. She says she is trying to decide what to do. Democrats have got this scandal with Eric Adams in New York City. The Republicans have got a scandal with their lieutenant governor down in North Carolina, who, of course, CNN investigated and reported had placed all sorts of inflammatory comments on a pornographic website a decade ago. So both of these parties now looking at these two respective scandals and worrying about their potential impact on the presidential race.
Extraordinary stuff. Look, really good to get your view across all things US and where it stands in the rest of the world. President and Chief Correspondent of Feature Story News, Simon Marks.
Cheers, Rosanna.
Well, let's show you some pictures of that now, shall we? What Simon was just talking about there. New York's Mayor Eric Adams was federally charged Thursday with crimes including wire fraud, soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations and bribery conspiracy. The just unsealed indictment follows a sweeping probe into the mayor's campaign and his close associates on whether he conspired with Turkish government officials to receive illegal contributions in exchange for official acts. The search at Adams' residence, known as Gracie Mansion, began before dawn and is the latest shock twist in a graft investigation against the Adams administration. According to Associated Press, in a video speech released Wednesday night, Adams vowed to fight any charges against him, claiming he's been made a target in a case based on lies. Well, to some other international news now. China saying its launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean was legitimate and routine after the rare test prompted a regional outcry. Japan's government saying it was not given advance notice and expressing concern about China's military buildup. In Japan, the world's longest-serving death row prisoner has been acquitted after 46 years. A court overturning a murder conviction on fabricated evidence for 88-year-old former boxer Iwao Hakamada, who was too frail to hear his acquittal in court. Kenya will deploy additional police officers to Haiti to help the government there fight armed gangs, aiming to have 2,500 officers there by January. President William Ruto making the commitment during his address at the UN General Assembly. And to some business news now. China plans to issue special sovereign bonds worth about $284 billion this year as part of fresh fiscal stimulus. Meanwhile, AFP reporting China's President Xi Jinping has admitted the country is facing new economic problems and pledged to ramp up employment and fix its troubled property sector. Meanwhile, the IMF's approved a $7 billion loan program for Pakistan with an immediate disbursement of around $1 billion. Pakistan's been struggling to stabilise its economy, leading to 22 bailouts since 1958 and is currently the IMF's fifth largest debtor. And the US economy front and centre with less than 40 days to go until the presidential election. Fresh data showing the country's GDP growth was 2.9% for 2023, up from a previously estimated 2.5%, thanks to a jump in consumer spending, among other factors. And the latest in an ongoing spat between the current UK government and Elon Musk. The tech billionaire sniping back online after learning he's not invited to an upcoming investment summit being hosted by Prime Minister Keir Starmer next month. Let's get a reminder now of our top stories. More strikes on Beirut as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects calls for a ceasefire and tells Israel's military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. US State Secretary Antony Blinken saying the world agrees on the need for a ceasefire ahead of meeting Israeli officials in New York. And Ukraine's President Zelensky thanking the White House for a further $8 billion in aid, rounding off his trip stateside. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burgess-Watson for Global News Today with special guest Lebanon's ambassador to the UK, Rami Mortada.